Have you ever felt tired? Not the kind of tired that sleep can fix, but the kind that sits somewhere deeper? The kind that makes you stare at your computer screen, reading the same sentence 3 times and still not understanding it. At 47, I thought I was just busy. Busy is normal. Busy means you are responsible. Busy means you matter. At least that's what I told myself. I worked in a mid-sized office in Ohio. Nothing dramatic, no shouting bosses, no impossible deadlines, just steady pressure, emails that never stopped, meetings that led to more meetings, a calendar filled from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., and sometimes beyond. I was good at my job, reliable, calm, the person people trusted when something went wrong. If a project was late, they called me. If a client was upset, they sent me. If a new employee was confused, I trained them. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for recognition. I believed that quiet strength was enough. But something was changing inside me, slowly, silently. I stopped looking forward to Mondays. Then I stopped enjoying Fridays. Even weekends felt heavy. On Sunday afternoons, a tight feeling would form in my chest. Not fear exactly, not sadness, just a weight, like carrying a backpack filled with invisible stones. At home, my wife would ask, "Long day?" And I would smile. Just the usual. The truth was harder to explain. I wasn't angry. I wasn't depressed. I wasn't even dramatically unhappy. I was empty. At night, I would sit in the living room after everyone went to bed. The house was quiet, the refrigerator humming softly, the clock ticking on the wall. I used to enjoy that silence. Now it felt different. Instead of peace, I felt numb. I started waking up at 3 a.m., not with panic, just awake. My mind already listing tasks, deadlines, conversations I needed to prepare for. I would check my phone, new emails already arriving, some from colleagues in different time zones, some marked urgent. I told myself, this is adulthood. This is responsibility. This is what happens when you're almost 50. But my body was telling another story. My shoulders were always tight. My patience was thinner. Small problems felt bigger than they should. One morning, I snapped at a coworker, not loudly, not dramatically, just a sharp tone, a short answer, the kind that surprises even you. He looked at me for a second, then said gently, "You okay?" I laughed it off. "Yeah, just tired." That became my answer for everything. Just tired. But tired doesn't explain why your favorite music sounds like noise. Tired doesn't explain why food tastes bland. Tired doesn't explain why you sit in your parked car for 5 extra minutes before going inside your house. I started doing that more often, sitting in the driveway, engine off, hands on the steering wheel, staring ahead, not wanting to go back to work, not even wanting to go inside, just wanting nothing. And the strange part? No one noticed. At work, I was still performing. Deadlines were met, emails were answered, problems were solved. At home, bills were paid. Dinner conversations happened. I attended family gatherings. I smiled in photos. From the outside, everything looked stable, successful even. Inside, something was quietly burning. Not a dramatic fire, more like a slow, steady flame. The kind that consumes wood from the inside out, until one day it collapses. But I didn't collapse. Not yet. Instead, I became quieter. In meetings, I spoke less. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't have the energy to explain. I stopped volunteering for new projects. I stopped offering creative ideas. I did what was required. Nothing more. One afternoon during a long meeting, I looked around the conference table. people talking, nodding, typing notes. And suddenly a thought came to me. If I disappeared for a week, would anything really change? The thought scared me, not because I wanted to disappear, but because I wasn't sure the answer. I had built my identity around being dependable, needed, steady. If I wasn't that, who was I? That evening, my daughter asked me to help her with a school project. Normally, I would sit down right away. This time, I hesitated. I'm a little busy, I said. I wasn't busy. I was drained. She nodded and walked away. The look on her face stayed with me longer than any email ever had. That was the first small crack. Not dramatic, not explosive, just a quiet realization. I was giving my best energy to a place that would replace me in 2 weeks if I left, and giving the leftovers to the people who would never replace me. Still, I kept going. Because that's what responsible adults do. We endure, we push, we stay strong, especially men my age. We don't talk about burnout. We don't say we're overwhelmed. We say we're fine. We say we're just busy. But late one night, sitting alone in the dark living room, I finally admitted something to myself. This wasn't just tiredness. It wasn't laziness. It wasn't weakness. It was burnout. Quiet, invisible, and slowly taking pieces of me. I didn't know yet what I would do. I didn't have a dramatic plan. I didn't draft a resignation letter. I just sat there, listening to the clock tick, and realized something had to change. Not loudly, not suddenly, but soon. The morning after I admitted to myself that I was burning out, nothing looked different. The sun still rose. The coffee machine still hummed. Traffic still moved slowly along the highway. But something inside me had shifted. When you finally name what you are feeling, it becomes harder to ignore. Before that night, I could hide behind the word busy. Now I had a new word, burnout. And once you see it, you begin to notice its fingerprints everywhere. At work, I realized I was no longer thinking long term. I was only surviving the day. Finish this report, answer these emails, get through this meeting. I used to care about improving systems, mentoring younger employees, planning for next quarter. Now, I just wanted the clock to reach 5 p.m. I wasn't lazy. In fact, I was still working hard. But there was no meaning attached to the effort anymore. It felt like running on a treadmill, sweating, breathing hard, but never moving forward. One afternoon, my manager called me into his office. He smiled. "You've been solid as always," he said. "We're thinking about expanding your responsibilities." 10 years ago, that sentence would have excited me. 5 years ago, it would have made me proud. That day, it made my stomach tighten. More responsibility meant more meetings, more pressure, more invisible weight added to the backpack I was already carrying. I nodded politely. "Thank you. I appreciate the trust." I walked back to my desk, sat down, and stared at my computer screen. Why did something positive feel like a threat? That question stayed with me. That evening, I searched online. Signs of burnout in middle age. The results were almost uncomfortable to read. Emotional exhaustion, detachment, reduced sense of accomplishment, irritability, trouble sleeping. It felt like someone had quietly observed my life. There was one sentence that struck me deeply. Burnout doesn't always look dramatic. It often looks like functioning normally while feeling empty inside. Functioning normally. That was me. No breakdown, no yelling, no missed deadlines, just a slow fading. I began to notice how often I said yes. Yes to extra tasks. Yes to covering for someone. Yes to staying late. Yes to solving problems that weren't mine. In saying yes made me feel useful, but it also erased my boundaries. Somewhere along the way, I had confused being valuable with being available at all times. At home, the pattern was similar. Yes, I'll fix that. Yes, I'll handle the insurance call. Yes, I'll drive. Yes, I'll pay. Yes, I'll plan. No one forced me. I volunteered. Because saying no felt selfish. And men my age weren't raised to prioritize rest. We were raised to provide, to endure, to handle it. But endurance without recovery becomes damage. One Saturday morning, my wife looked at me carefully. "You're here," she said slowly, "but you're not really here." I tried to joke. "What does that even mean?" She didn't smile. "It feels like you're somewhere else all the time." Her words were gentle, not accusing, just honest, and they hurt more than criticism ever could. That afternoon, I took a walk alone. No phone, no podcast, no destination. Just walking through quiet suburban streets. I realized I had not walked without purpose in years. Every movement in my life had a reason: work, errands, obligations. This was the first time in a long time that I was moving without producing anything. At first, I felt restless. Then I felt something unexpected: space. Space between thoughts, space between responsibilities. In that space, another truth surfaced. I was afraid to step back, not because I loved the stress, but because I didn't know who I would be without it. If I wasn't the reliable problem solver, the calm fixer, the always available one, who was I? Burnout had slowly tied my identity to exhaustion. If I was tired, it meant I was working hard. If I was overwhelmed, it meant I was important. Rest felt like weakness, but exhaustion was not strength. It was erosion. That week, I did something small. I declined a non-essential meeting. I wrote a simple email. "I won't be able to attend. Please send notes." My finger hesitated before pressing send. My heart beat faster than it should have. It was just a meeting, but emotionally, it felt bigger. No one reacted dramatically. No one questioned my commitment. The world did not collapse. That surprised me. The next day, I left the office at exactly 5 p.m., not 5:20, not 5:45, 5. As I walked to my car, I felt almost guilty, like I was breaking an unspoken rule. But again, nothing happened. And the building did not fall apart. No urgent phone calls came. I realized something quietly powerful. Most of the pressure I felt was self-created. Yes, expectations existed, but I had amplified them. I had silently volunteered for the weight. That night, sitting at the dinner table, I felt slightly more present, not fully restored, not suddenly happy, but less distant. Burnout had not disappeared, but I had created the smallest crack in its control. I began to understand that stepping away did not have to mean quitting immediately. It could begin with boundaries, with pauses, with choosing where my energy goes. I didn't announce anything. I didn't post about self-care. I didn't make dramatic declarations. I simply started paying attention to my fatigue, to my irritability, to the tightness in my chest before meetings. Instead of ignoring those signals, I treated them like information. And for the first time in years, I asked myself a question I had never considered. What do I actually need? Not what my boss needed, not what my coworkers needed, not what my family needed. What did I need? The answer wasn't clear yet, but asking the question felt like the beginning of something. Not a loud rebellion, not a dramatic exit, just a quiet shift. And sometimes, quiet shifts are the most powerful kind. After I began asking myself what I actually needed, something uncomfortable happened. I didn't have an answer. For decades, my needs had been simple and practical: provide for the family, do well at work. stay healthy enough to keep going. I knew how to respond to external expectations. But when I turned inward and asked, "What do I need?" there was silence, not peaceful silence, confused silence. I realized I had built my entire adult life around roles: employee, husband, father, problem solver. Each role came with instructions, but nowhere in those instructions did it say how to protect your own energy. The next week at work, I started observing myself more carefully. In meetings, I noticed how my shoulders tightened before certain people spoke. I noticed how my breathing became shallow when deadlines were mentioned. I noticed how often I volunteered before anyone even asked. It was almost automatic. A small pause in the room, and I would fill it. "I can handle that." That sentence had defined me. But now I tried something different. I let the pause stay. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. It felt uncomfortable, like watching someone drop a glass in slow motion and not rushing to catch it. But something surprising happened. Other people spoke up. Other people offered to help. The world did not fall apart without my immediate response. That realization was both freeing and painful. Freeing because I didn't have to carry everything. Painful and because I understood how much of the burden had been self-assigned. At home, the changes were even quieter. One evening, my wife started talking about a scheduling conflict. Normally, I would jump in with solutions. This time, I listened fully. And when she finished, I said something simple. "I don't have the energy to solve this tonight. Can we look at it tomorrow?" She looked surprised, not upset, just surprised. "Of course," she said. That was it. No argument, no disappointment, just understanding. I had expected resistance. Instead, I found permission. It made me wonder how many invisible rules I had been following that no one else had written. Burnout, I began to see, was not only about workload, it was about identity. I had tied my worth to endurance. If I was exhausted, it meant I was trying hard enough. If I was stressed, it meant I was important enough. Letting go of that belief felt dangerous. Who was I if I wasn't the one who carried everything quietly? One Friday afternoon, something small happened. A younger colleague asked for help on a project. I genuinely did not have the capacity. My calendar was full. My mind was tired. Normally, I would have stayed late. This time, I said, "I can review it Monday morning. I'm logging off at 5 today." He nodded. "Sounds good." That was all. No judgment, no questioning. I shut down my computer at 4:59. As the screen went dark, I felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. Fear that I was becoming less dedicated, relief that I was choosing myself. Driving home, I noticed something different. The tightness in my chest was softer. The constant mental checklist was quieter, not gone, just quieter. That evening, my daughter asked again for help with homework. This time, I sat beside her immediately, not distracted, not half listening, fully there. She explained her project. I listened. We laughed at a small mistake she made, and in that moment, I realized something painful and beautiful at the same time. Burnout had not only taken my energy, it had taken my presence. I had been physically in the room but mentally somewhere else, worrying about emails, replaying meetings, anticipating tomorrow. Stepping back at work had created space at home, and that space felt more valuable than any promotion. Still, doubts remained. Was I becoming less ambitious? Was I losing my edge? In American culture, especially for men in their 40s and 50s, stepping back can feel like failure. We are taught to climb, to expand, to achieve. But no one talks about maintenance. No one talks about sustainability. I began reading about midlife transitions, not crisis. Transition. There's a difference. A crisis is loud and visible. A transition is subtle and internal. It's when you realize that the strategies that built your early success may not serve your later life. At 25, saying yes to everything built my career. At 47, saying yes to everything was draining it. One evening, sitting quietly after dinner, I asked myself another question. If nothing changed, where would I be in 5 years? The answer felt heavy, more tired, more detached, more distant from the people I love. That vision scared me more than any career risk. Burnout had been whispering for years, through sleepless nights, through irritability, through numbness. I had ignored the whispers. Now I was finally listening. And listening led to a quiet decision. Not dramatic, not impulsive, just steady. I would not wait for a breakdown to justify change. I would step away before I was forced to. I didn't know exactly what that meant yet. Reduced hours, a different role, a break. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a small sense of control. Not over my workload, not over other people, but over my response. Burnout thrives in silence and denial. It weakens when you name it and choose differently. No one at the office had noticed the shift yet. From the outside, I was still the same calm professional, but internally, a quiet transformation was underway. And sometimes, the most powerful moves in life are the ones no one else sees. Once I admitted to myself that I needed change, the question became unavoidable. How? Not in theory, not in quiet reflection, but in real life. Change sounds brave in your thoughts. It feels complicated in your calendar. I started with numbers, mortgage, insurance, college savings, retirement contributions. At 47, responsibility is not abstract. It has monthly payments. Part of my burnout came from fear. Fear that stepping back would create instability. Fear that reducing effort would reduce security. So instead of making an emotional decision, I made a practical one. I scheduled a meeting with my manager, not to resign, not to complain, just to talk. The morning of that meeting, my hands felt cold, not because I was angry, but because I was about to say something unfamiliar. I can't keep carrying this pace. When I sat down in his office, I kept my voice steady. I've been reflecting on my workload, I said. I've realized I'm stretched thinner than I should be. He leaned back. Listening, I continued. I want to stay committed, but I need to adjust how much I'm handling. Some responsibilities need to shift. There was a pause, long enough for doubt to enter my mind. Was I about to be seen as weak, replaceable, less driven? Instead, he said something unexpected. I was wondering when you'd say that. I blinked. What do you mean? You've been taking on more than anyone else for years, he said. I assumed you were fine with it? Fine with it. That phrase again. I realized how often silence is interpreted as agreement. Because I never complained, it looked like I was comfortable. Because I never refused, it looked like I had endless capacity. We discussed redistributing 2 major projects. We talked about mentoring someone to take over certain tasks. The conversation was calm, professional, reasonable. And when I left his office, I felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because I had finally spoken. Burnout grows in unspoken expectations. That meeting did not solve everything overnight. The workload didn't disappear, but something fundamental shifted. I was no longer pretending. At home, I made another decision. No work email after 7 p.m. Not occasionally, not just to check. None. The first night felt uncomfortable. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. My mind imagined emergencies. By morning, I checked. Nothing urgent, just routine messages. The world had continued without my midnight supervision. That realization felt almost embarrassing. How important had I believed I was? The deeper change, though, was internal. For years, my value came from output, tasks completed, problem solved, hours invested. Now I was experimenting with a different measurement: energy preserved, presence maintained, peace protected. One Saturday afternoon, I sat in the backyard alone. No agenda, no project, just sunlight and quiet. I tried to remember the last time I had done nothing without guilt. I couldn't. Even relaxation used to feel productive. Watching documentaries to learn something, listening to business podcasts to improve, everything had to justify itself. That afternoon, I allowed myself to exist without improvement, and I noticed something subtle. My thoughts were slower, less sharp-edged, less urgent. Burnout had trained my brain to scan constantly for problems. When you step back, you realize how loud that internal alarm system has become. But stepping away did not mean quitting my job immediately. It meant redefining my relationship with it. I stopped volunteering for optional committees. I declined weekend calls unless truly necessary. I began taking my full lunch break outside the building. Small acts, almost invisible. Yet each one reinforced a message. My well-being is not secondary. One evening, my wife said something that stayed with me. "You seem more here lately, not happier, not dramatically different. Just more here." That was enough. Burnout had pulled me into survival mode. Stepping back was bringing me into awareness. Of course, doubt still visited. What if slowing down affected promotions? What if people thought I was less committed? But another question began to feel more important. What is the cost of continuing like before? At midlife, time feels different. You become aware that energy is not infinite, that presence matters more than titles, that being respected at work means little if you are emotionally absent at home. I realized I had been waiting for a dramatic sign, a breakdown, a health scare, a crisis, something that would justify radical change. But quiet burnout rarely gives you dramatic permission. It just slowly takes pieces of you until you barely recognize yourself. Stepping away, even partially, was not dramatic. There was no announcement, no social media post, no farewell speech, just boundaries, conversations, and deliberate pauses. And in those pauses, I began to feel something unfamiliar. Not excitement, not ambition, stability, a steady ground under my feet. For the first time in years, I wasn't running ahead of myself. I wasn't carrying everyone else's weight. I was standing still long enough to feel my own balance. No one at work made a big comment. No one said, "You seem different." From the outside, I was still performing, still professional, still reliable. But internally, I was no longer burning at the same intensity. The flame had lowered, controlled, sustainable, and I understood something clearly. Quiet power is not about enduring endlessly, and it is about knowing when to step back before endurance becomes self-destruction. The real change was not visible on my resume. It was visible in my breathing, in my tone, in the way I walked into my own house. I had not escaped responsibility. I had rebalanced it. And that quiet step away was the beginning of reclaiming myself. The final step away did not happen in a dramatic moment. There was no argument, no slammed doors, no shocking announcement. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning. I woke up before my alarm. The house was still dark. For a few seconds, I lay there, listening to my breathing. Steady, calm, not rushed. And for the first time in years, I asked myself a simple question. If I keep living like this for the next 10 years, will I respect myself? The answer was clear. No, not because my job was terrible, not because my life was bad, but because I had slowly drifted away from myself. Burnout had not destroyed my career. It had quietly reduced my spirit. Even with the boundaries I had created, even with the workload adjustments, something deeper was calling for change, not escape, not rebellion, alignment. Over the next few weeks, I began exploring options: internal transfer, reduced hours, consulting. I ran numbers again, spoke with my wife openly, listened to my fears without letting them control me. There was one sentence she said that stayed with me. I would rather have less money and more of you. More of you. I didn't realize how much of me had been missing. Eventually, I made the decision. I requested a step down from my leadership responsibilities into a more focused individual role. Less managing, less meetings, more defined hours. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't a promotion. Some people might have called it a step back, but to me, it felt like stepping towards something healthier. When I told my manager, he looked surprised. "You've built a strong position here," he said. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I replied. "I want sustainability." That word felt powerful. Sustainability. Not success at any cost, not endless growth, just a pace I could maintain without losing myself. The transition took a few months. During that time, I trained someone else, documented processes, closed projects carefully. I didn't burn bridges, I didn't disappear, I simply shifted. And here's what surprised me most. No one judged me the way I feared they would. Some colleagues quietly admitted they were tired too. One said, "I wish I had the courage to do that." Courage. I had never thought of it that way. To me, it felt like survival. But maybe survival is courage in midlife. The first week in my new role felt strange. My calendar was lighter, my evenings were protected. I kept expecting chaos, an emergency, a sign that I had made a mistake. It didn't come. Instead, something else arrived: space. Space to think clearly, space to exercise regularly, space to sit at the dinner table without checking my phone. Burnout had taught me something important. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers for years, through irritability, through numbness, through quiet resentment. And if you ignore those whispers, eventually they become consequences: health problems, broken relationships, emotional collapse. I was fortunate. I listened before it reached that stage. Now, when I wake up at night, it's rare, and if it happens, my thoughts are softer. I am no longer rehearsing conversations for meetings, no longer anticipating tomorrow's pressure. I am simply present. At work, I still contribute. I still perform well. But my identity is no longer fused to my output. If an email waits until morning, it waits. If someone else solves a problem, I let them. At home, I feel different. Not louder, not dramatically happier, just steady. My daughter talks, and I truly hear her. My wife shares her thoughts, and I am not distracted. Even my own thoughts feel less crowded. Looking back, I realized something profound. No one noticed I was burning out because I hid it well. I smiled, I delivered, I endured. But quiet suffering is still suffering. And quiet strength does not mean silent self-destruction. Stepping away was not weakness. It was wisdom earned through exhaustion. If you're listening to this and you feel constantly tired, constantly stretched, constantly fine on the outside but empty inside, pause. You don't have to quit tomorrow. You don't have to make dramatic changes, but you can begin with honesty. Name what you're feeling. Notice your energy. Ask yourself what sustainability looks like for you. Burnout thrives in denial, it weakens in awareness. And sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is not a loud leap forward, but a quiet step back. Thank you for listening slowly with me. If this story reflects something in your own life, stay with this space. Here we value calm strength, we value thoughtful change, and we remember that real power is not in how much you endure, but in how wisely you protect yourself.